Have you heard this before?
Most of us learn languages backwards.
Or this?
And it works better than traditional classes?
3.5 times faster, according to research by the National Training Laboratory.
Or maybe even this?
Must have been studying your whole life.
No, not really. I use the immersive learning method, and I've become a polyglot in just 1 year.
Claims like these are everywhere. And part of the problem is people don't know how to distinguish between what is true and what is false, or what is falsifiable and what can be shown with evidence. Today I'm going to talk about how research is misused, especially in language learning circles, to sell you ideas that might not be exactly correct. Let's get going. Part of the reason I want to talk about this topic is because as somebody who is doing research in second language learning, somebody who's been learning second languages for, I don't know, the past 10 years or so, and somebody who's been teaching language, at least English, as a second language, I've seen a lot of misinformation that not only wastes learners' time, it can also do damage in respects of what people should expect when they go to a class or when they learn language on their own. And if they're doing something that isn't working, but they're told it should work, a lot of times those people are going to be blaming themselves, which of course can lead to things like stress or burnout. And I think it's more of an issue than people might realize, especially when I think of, like, if I look at videos where you have maybe somebody selling some idea or telling you this is how you learn, and then you have people in the comments saying, like, I feel like I don't learn that way, or I've been learning languages for so long and I never knew this, and you know, this kind of stuff. Normally that suggests that information is going around that people are not necessarily being truthful on, or they don't necessarily completely understand what they're selling, kind of thing. And then obviously in terms of like influencers, you want people to click on your video, right? And sometimes clickbait's not always bad. You know, like if they click on a video but it offers something that's useful for the person, even if they didn't expect it, I don't think that's necessarily bad. As opposed to clickbait where it's like you click on it and it gives you nothing that you expected and also nothing of value to you, then of course it's kind of like, why did people even do that? And I feel like a lot of the things when people talk about research and in science is the same way. And even people that are really prominent in the like YouTube language learning circle or sphere, realm, I don't know what you want to use, they tend to use certain buzzwords that I think kind of garners trust with the viewer. But from a research perspective, I think it's a little dishonest. So for example, I've seen a number of YouTubers who have doctorates, so they're like well educated and perhaps they know things people that don't have doctorates might not know, but their doctorate is not in language learning. And so that's kind of an issue. Like I saw one person, he has 2 doctorates, one in like cognitive science and one in law. And cognitive science obviously is related to learning because it's language learning because it's related to learning in general. But it's not the same thing. I know many teachers, for example, who have master's degrees are getting doctorates in like curriculum and instruction. And they might have really good ideas of how learning works and how things should be planned in like a math class or a science class. But when it comes to language learning, there are differences that people just don't expect. You know, like if a student doesn't have the vocabulary knowledge, they're not going to be able to learn it very well. If they can, you know, speak like conversational English, for example, people might assume that means they're good enough to take this academic class. But if they don't have those same academic skills in their mother tongue, they can actually struggle with learning. That's not always the case, but generally that has been found. There's a lot of research on that, and I'll post some in the comments. My whole goal for this channel is to promote critical thinking. Some people might disagree with me because there are times I do delete stupid comments. That doesn't mean if you disagree with me, I delete it, because I do have some comments that I haven't deleted. It's just if you disagree, you offer no evidence, even when I ask for it, or you just kind of like, I don't do name calling, so if people are going to do name calling stuff, which generally hasn't happened, but just certain things, people like to have these ideas about things, but they can't back up the idea. And that doesn't mean the idea is wrong, per se. But it makes it very difficult to have a discussion if I don't know what you're talking about, you say something, you have no evidence, where do we go from there, right? And that's kind of like the point. So it gets to this point where it's like people just want to say what they want to say without actually having a discussion. I don't mind being wrong, especially from the perspective of a researcher. Like the whole point of research is not to prove your point, especially social science, which I'll get to in a minute, but it's to find evidence to understand something. And that doesn't necessarily mean I need to be right about how I understand it. And I think that's where people mix it up, because when we think of science, we think of like, you know, in a laboratory with like beakers and you're mixing, you know, liquids together and you're doing chemistry. That's a totally different type of science than social science. In chemistry, it's a lot easier. I'm not saying it is easy, but I'm saying it is easier to control for variables than it is in social science, because social science variables are abstract. You have to first have a definition of what it is, then you have to then decide how do we measure that, and then is the measurement actually valid? It's not like if I say, well, here's, you know, 30 milliliters of water. Well, it's 30 milliliters regardless of how you look at it. But if I say happy, like how do we define happiness? And then once we have a definition, how do we measure happiness? Like if I ask people, are you happy? And everyone says yes, like maybe on a scale of 1 to 5, rank that you're happy. And someone says 5 and someone else says 5. How do I know that this person's 5 is the same as this person's 5? I don't. I have to assume, I'm making an assumption that it is, but maybe to this person 5 is way up here and to this person 5 is here. That's the problem with social science. And the same thing happens with language learning. Language learning is a social science. So when we study how language learning works, we're using kind of like abstract ideas and a lot of assumptions when we do research. And people who say, this proves that, or this proves whatever, that's not social science. Social science doesn't prove things. It finds trends and patterns, and we use those trends and patterns to understand a phenomenon or phenomena, and then from that, we try to make theories. So like you have qualitative and quantitative research. People tend to think quantitative is better, but they have different functions. Qualitative's function is to understand something, to get in depth. So we can use that in-depth analysis to then kind of have hypotheses or develop theories from it. And then we use quantitative research to test those hypotheses. That's how it works. It's not like, well, quantitative is better because it proves things. It doesn't. Imagine like if I wanted to say that I think grammar education works in language learning. So then I have a treatment where like we do one day or 1 hour, and this is, research will do this, they'll do like a 1 hour course. And during that hour, you as the participant, you get grammar education, and this control group doesn't get grammar education. They just get regular, like maybe we use the textbook, but we don't focus on grammar. And then we take a grammar test after. And then you take the test and you find out, oh, okay, these students scored better than those students. That proves grammar works. How does it prove that? You did a 1 hour test, like a 1 hour treatment. How do we know long term that that works? And even if they were able to do it long term, how long term does it last, and can they use it? Those are all things we have to think about. And I think a lot of times when you see research, people don't talk about that. They just say like, science proves this, it shows this, and blah, 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 blah. I also want to talk about how science gets kind of misused or abused. One of the things is people will use buzzwords or jargon or both. Buzzwords are things that you hear all the time, and in the West, at least in America, a lot of buzzwords are things like natural, like all natural flavor, or natural like whatever. And a lot of times, even when you see on a package like all natural flavors, it doesn't mean it comes from nature. It means it tastes like it comes from nature, or they've like scientifically engineered the flavor. But people will think, they see natural and they think that's good. Just like the word organic, it's getting to the point now where everything is organic. Like I'm organic because I'm an organism, you know, like just, people misuse these things. Then you have jargon. People will put certain words together that sound good. Over time, we've had things like, let's say, talk about like autism or anxiety, and now it's neurodivergent. And now I'm seeing people say things like neurologically aligned. What the fuck does that mean? Like, what is neurologically aligned? Aligned with how your brain works? I don't get how, but people say it. Or they'll say things like something input, or like something acquisition, or like there was a video I saw the other day, maybe I'll post a clip of it, but it said like strategic, what was it? Like active strategic input or something like that, but it's just like you're just watching TV. You know, so like why, it's TV. Like you're just making up words to sound really scientific, and that makes people feel like they can trust you. But if you don't understand what you're saying, then the people who trust you are also, you know, they're kind of missing out on valuable information that they could be getting elsewhere. The other thing is people will do is they cherry pick. I know people, I don't dislike crash on. I feel like when people hear me talk, I'm very middle ground, okay? So is grammar bad? No. Is it good? Maybe also no, like for learning, you know? So I'm very middle ground. Like I think there are times where it's appropriate that you should be teaching and learning grammar. There are times where I think it's not worth any use. But people tend to hear the opposite. So like if people disagree with me, they think that I'm the extreme opposite, and I'm not. I'm very middle ground. I'm going to talk about Krashen, that's why I brought this up. When somebody quotes, you know, or has a source from Krashen and says like, well, Krashen found that this is true, so that means that he proved. A lot of the research they're referring to is from like 1980. That's a long time ago, and people have tested his like hypotheses for that entire span of time. And for the most part, a lot of Krashen's hypotheses do hold true, but there are limitations to them. And there are times where it doesn't make sense. Like, he says that comprehensible input is all you need to acquire a language. But if that were true, why are there people who are heritage learners where they understand the language completely, fluently, they have no issue with it, but they can't speak a word of it? That disproves his hypotheses. I wouldn't say disproves, I would say it refutes. But the thing is that evidence suggests it's not the whole picture, right? Like, comprehensible input is a big part of the picture. It's not the whole picture. There's something missing. So then you have other hypotheses like the output hypothesis by Swain, or you have like interaction hypotheses, and you have all these different things. Like, they're all finding evidence for what they're saying. So can we say that, like, well, because this person found evidence, that proves it? Well, if it proves it, how are they all right and all wrong at the same time? There's pieces to it that are right, and there are pieces to it that might be wrong, or maybe misinformed, or maybe there's certain data that's missing, or information that we didn't look at. Those are the things you have to think about when you're listening to somebody say, research says this, or science proves this, or this person from 100 years ago, because for some reason tradition is also one thing people use. Like, it's a really old method that's worked for centuries, and then people are like, oh yeah, that's good. Be critical about this stuff, you know, like, challenge those ideas. The other thing too is sometimes people will make up theories or models. It's a mixture of using this like jargon in like scientific words or buzzwords, but they'll use it to try to create their own method. And a lot of times all it is they've taken an already found method, like a method that someone else already created or discovered, and then they just change the name to it, and maybe they add something, like add this tiny little thing, like, that's my new method. Like, come on, that's a lot of bullshit. So then the thing I think that people need to think about is when somebody talks about research, your first question is, where's the source? What is it? Is it peer reviewed? Like, do you have other researchers in the field who are looking at it and actually challenging and questioning what your results are? Because if you don't, I mean, it's not a perfect science, okay? So like, there are people I know that get published that probably shouldn't get published. Like, the research didn't really do much. Like, especially in China, we have a lot of people. So in China, in order to get promoted, I'm sure it's the same in the West, but it's very, we call it juan in Chinese. Competitive, I think is what we say in English. So it's very competitive. And so people need to publish to get promoted. And so what they'll do is they'll do really simple research, like hand out a survey or a questionnaire. And then they'll take, you know, the results, and they'll use those results to say, this proves what? What does it prove? That people think that? That doesn't prove anything. Like, I saw one research that was saying, they asked people about video games and learning English, and some of the questions are like, I feel like I learn English better when I play video games. So it's like 1 for no and 5 for yes, right? And then they took that and said, this proves that you can learn English through video games. No, it doesn't. That doesn't prove that. I think you can learn English through video games, but that you'd have to have other evidence. That's not evidence. That's just people thinking that it does that, right? You're just asking people's beliefs about something, and then they turn it and say that proves. It doesn't prove anything. And like I said earlier, if you're with the grammar thing, like if you're doing a test and you're actually doing an experiment, checking people and seeing if they learned, that still does not prove for all people in all times, in all scenarios, that this is the case. So if I say, I taught these 30 students grammar and they did better on the test than these other 30 students, that proves that grammar education is good for language learning. Okay, what was the language that you used? How similar is it to their mother tongue? How much experience do they have learning the language? Like, what's their proficiency? Have they learned grammar before? Or that type of grammar, have they learned it before? It's very difficult to, how do you control for that? There's no way to control for that. So a lot of studies will try using made-up languages or made-up words because then they know no one's ever learned that before. But you also have the scenario where maybe, perhaps the group you got, because it's usually not random, the group you got could be people who are just really good at learning languages. Well, then maybe they're really good at learning languages, and so they learn better with grammar, right? Those are the issues that people don't talk about. Studies will generalize. It's kind of like what I was just talking about. Studies generalize their findings and they say like, well, we found this, that means like it's true for all people, and it's not. You have to think about perspective. So like, I'm one person, I have lived experiences, and maybe they are true, but that doesn't mean that's the same way for everyone else, even if they have a similar experience. And that's what people need to think about. Like, my experience is a limited one-person view on the world. Science is like that too. It's a little bit bigger because you're trying to look at more people, but it's still a very limited view on the world. A good example of this is Bus. I don't know if this person is still alive. They did a study in 1989, and it was on like what people look for in a mate, like biological components of what people look for in a mate. But again, it was a questionnaire, so self-reported data already is an issue because people might say things that they think are socially acceptable, or they might say things because they've been taught to say those things. Anyway, it was a really large study. Like they I don't remember how many people, it was thousands of people that they surveyed, and it was all over the world. And at the time, it was like one of the largest studies examining this phenomenon. Well, they found that for the majority of their participants, like thousands of people, men preferred women who were younger, more attractive. Women preferred men who were slightly older and had money. And so this became, for a long time, and it still kind of is pervasive today, people thought, oh, that means that men want young girls and women want men who have money. And there might be some truth to that, but the problem is, when you look at the data, they only researched people in cities. So they've had replicated studies where they've actually looked at people in rural areas, and some studies have found differing opinions where people in rural areas actually don't have those types of views. You know, so it's like, my point is even if you look at a lot of people, if you're aiming at people with a similar characteristic, so people live in the city, that's the same characteristic, they might be prone to different types of views or different types of worldviews or ideas or wants and needs compared to somebody who does not live in the city. It's the same thing when you're looking at people, like a lot of research on language learning is from people in college. That's an issue. People in college are educated. People in college have certain characteristics that are probably quite similar. One of them being they're in college. We need more research on like people who are older than that, like 30, 40, 50, 60-year-olds learning a language. We need more research on children learning a language in a natural environment compared to like in a school environment. And we're starting to get more of those, but that's been a gap in the research for a long time. And because of that, when people go online and they look for research, they usually tend to find the really old studies or the studies that are like sort of outdated, and then they take that idea and they just generalize it and be like, this is true all the time, and it's not. The other thing is, when you're looking, just like when I post in the comments, I try to give you multiple studies. And like I said in my previous post, it's not exhaustive, it's not an exhaustive list. But the goal is I want people to be able to look at least some type of a beginning of where I'm coming from. It's important that when you're looking at an issue, you try to look at, is there evidence for it? Is there evidence against it? How do they gather the evidence? What's the, like, is there a conflict of interest? Like, let's say I'm a professor. I'm not, but let's say I am. Let's say I'm actually on a tenure track. In order to get tenure, I have to publish research. Well, I did research, and my research is non-significant. A lot of journals won't publish that. If I want to get into a good journal, I need the research to show that there's significance. So I'm going to tweak the data, or I'm going to tweak my research question. I'm going to do something to try to make it so that I can make it look like I found significance. And there are papers on that. I'll post one in the comments. There are papers on this, like people want significance because significance sells. The other thing is people misunderstand what significance means. They think that if you found significance, that proves that this is better than that. Like A is significant and B is not, so A is better than B. Sure, but what's the effect size of the significance? If you have a very, very small effect size, there's a difference, yeah, but the difference isn't that big. It might not even matter to do it. So imagine if I'm going to use this special method to teach you English, and the method is slightly better than that one, but it would cost thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours to train everyone. Well, then is it really worth using that method? It's only slightly better. The other thing is, like, do they cite studies? So originally when I did this channel, I thought maybe I'll just do like kind of like layperson information from a science perspective. But then I found that people kind of just think I'm talking out of my ass. So then I thought, okay, I'll post the studies. And I think that's really important too, because then it gives people kind of an avenue to go if they don't believe me or they don't agree or whatever. But it is important. So like if you ask people, like I've seen many channels that use this, like science proves this and we found this, and like where are the studies? Can you point me to the study? They're actually, I'm gonna say a name here, there's a company, JumpSpeak. I've seen their ads many times, and they constantly say this, like one scientific study proved that if you use immersion, you learn 3.5 times faster or better than not using immersion. But like, I can't find what they're talking about. I have no idea what they're referring to. And even if they're, like, what do you mean 3.5 times better? Because did the students score 3.5 times higher? Like, what does that mean? They don't say. And a lot of their ads are AI. Like, I've seen many of the JumpSpeak ads, not all of them, but some of them are AI. And it's like, do they also use AI to find the study to talk about it? Which I think now with AI people are doing. I think people use AI to like ask AI, can you basically write me a script for a video and give me, research on it or ideas on it. And the thing is, AI is really bad at interpreting research. It can find it for you, but I've done this before. Like I write papers, and sometimes I kind of get curious. So I wrote a paper, and then what I did is I took my notes that I used to write my paper and I put that into AI and asked it to write a paper for me. Terrible. It's a terrible paper. Like that kind of stuff, I would never encourage anyone to use. At least the way AI is now. But then if you use it to make a video, of course, you're going to have information that might not be correct, but you don't realize that because you don't specialize in this. And you don't have to specialize in language learning to talk about it. But I'm saying because you don't specialize in it, you don't realize that some of the information is wrong. That's the point I'm making. That's why it's better to go to the original source. So like if you use AI to make a video or to help you with homework, you should ask it to locate a source for you and then you read the source yourself. Like you find it and you do the work yourself, because AI, although can be helpful, it has a lot of limitations in this regard, especially when it comes to interpreting like data or science kind of stuff. I don't think I'll do it in this video because the video is going kind of long, but I think what I'll do is I do want to do a video where I'll use an open source, open access journal or paper, and like go over some of these details, because I think it's important for people to realize like when you read a study, a lot of people just look at the abstract. Like I had one guy that argued with me. Oh my God, it was so annoying. We argued for like 20 comments. I asked him for like research, what is he talking about? He just randomly, he probably used AI. He randomly found studies that had nothing to do with it. Actually, 2 of the studies he found were in opposition to his point. Like they were showing evidence that suggested he was wrong. And so I was like, you didn't even read these. And then he's like, well, I'm still right. Fuck off. Like, why are you even bothering with this, you know? So I wanna go through like how people should read studies when they read them. So, you know, like where to start, what to look for. And it's not just, I found the discussion and so that means this is right. Like you also need to look at how do they gather the data. And the thing is, I realize people who aren't getting their doctorate might not care about that. But when somebody's telling you something is true or not true, that's something you should think about, like how do I know that it's true? So for closing, I'd like to say real science, especially social science, and again, this might be slightly different than natural science. I'm not a natural scientist, don't hold me to that. But real science in social science takes time. And it's messy. It's not just simply, I looked at this and I found this to be true, that means it's true all the time. It's like, I'm looking at this variable, this is how I define it based on this theory or based on this model. But then somebody else might do the same research with a different theory, different model, you know, analyzing it from a different perspective, and they might get different results. So then we say like, how do we look at these 2 results from different perspectives, but they both found significance, or they both found this, right? So who's right? You know, that's how you have to look at it. It's okay that it's messy, it's okay that it's sloppy. At least in that regard. I'm not saying like do sloppy research, but I'm just saying like trying to find answers can be sloppy. I don't mind disagreement. I like curiosity, but I want curiosity also with an open mind. So if you're somebody that wants to prove me wrong, that's fine, but do it with an open mind rather than like, I know I'm right and you're wrong. That's not an open mind, you know, like you can say like, I think I'm right and I think you're wrong. That's more open-minded, you know, and that's how everyone is. Like if you have a belief, of course you think you're right, otherwise you wouldn't believe it. That's fine. But just be more willing to have like an actual conversation rather than a, you're wrong and I'm right and I'm not gonna listen to you anymore. And yeah, but as a takeaway, if somebody says like science proves it or research shows, well, first of all, if somebody says science proves it, they're wrong if it's social science, because again, social science doesn't prove anything. If they say research shows, ask where's the research? Show me the source, lead me to it. If it's something like a blog, you know, or like a news thing, like that doesn't mean the information is wrong, okay? It just means you can't verify it. Unless, of course, they're talking about a study, but either way, you have to get to some type of verifiable truth, and if you can't verify it, it's really difficult to say that they're right or wrong. That's the whole point. Oh, I also wanted to say, I posted a post, is that what they're called on YouTube? I don't know. I'm not a boomer, but I'm very boomer-minded, at least when it comes to like technology. I made a post on YouTube like a week ago, I think. Basically, I want to write a book, not like publish a book, but like an ebook that would be free. I don't want to charge anything for it, and I'm just curious what you would want to learn about. So I don't want to do basic stuff, like I don't want to do stuff that other people might have covered. I'd like to do like more, maybe it's like stuff that you've had questions to and you seem to never get an answer. Maybe you've learned about a method, but you don't quite understand how it works, that kind of stuff. And I want to kind of explain it from a scientific perspective, so I'll have sources in the ebook. I'll try to make it more like casual talk as opposed to like academic talk, but I do want to have access to sources that people can see. Depending on what I talk about, I might also give examples. So like if I talk about a method, I might give examples in it, or to explain like how, like show how you can do something if you don't know how to do it. I'm fine with doing that. I just want to know what you as the viewer is interested in learning. Yeah, so like hit me up in the comments, let me know, and I'll see you next time. Bye.